Alright, hello everybody, and welcome back to Rogue Leader Gaming, and welcome back to another Derail Valley tutorial. Today, we are going to be taking a look at the DH4, one of the couple of new locomotives added with the Derail Valley Simulator update. It's a diesel hydraulic, so that means that it uses a diesel engine to power the wheels through a torque converter. There are actually 3 torque converters, with different ratios serving as gears for the engine. And it'll switch through them automatically, so you don't need to really worry about that. One of the things to watch out for with a torque converter is that the larger the difference between the engine and drivetrain RPM, so how fast the engine's spinning up and how fast the wheels are spinning, the more torque it's going to generate. But also, doing so, it generates a lot of heat. So this engine also has a fan that will help to regulate the temperature of the oil pressure, or the temperature of the oil, in order to keep things nice and cool. It's very automated, everything with this locomotive, and it's honestly pretty hard to screw up with this thing other than just running it off the tracks, though you can overload it or overheat it, even with that fan, if you leave it in full throttle, so be careful about that. That's kind of the concept of how a diesel hydraulic works. It works off of like hydraulic fluid, I guess, spinning. The engine will spin a tube of hydraulic fluid, and that will in turn spin the wheels, I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. I know this is a tutorial and all the stuff. I know how to drive this in the game. How it works in real life, ooh. But I do know how to drive it in the game. I'm a little uncertain about how it physically works, but I do know how to drive it in the game. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, there's nothing on the outside. I mentioned this with the DM3. I really wish there was something on, like, the outside where you had to, like, I don't know, climb up here, open one of these panels, and tinker around for a second, like you do in the DE6. But, there is not, unfortunately. It would be kind of cool, but oh well. So, of course, getting into it, before we get into it, I want to get into it sooner rather than later so we can see the lights, but, this is based off of the German DB Class V90, which I'll flash up a picture on screen, which was a diesel locomotive built from a need for a heavy shunting locomotive. So this thing is basically either a heavy shunter, or sometimes here in the US we might call it like a road switcher. It's reasonably heavy, but it can kind of do a bit of both. A bit of, like, switching duties, but it can also do some pretty hefty road duties as well. Honestly, what these things are definitely, like, the best for is switching, like, local freights. And so you'd have them running on, like, a main line, and along the way there's a couple stops you gotta make to switch out a couple of industries. So you still need to do some switching moves, and it's not just from one yard to the next yard, but you gotta do a little bit of switching on the job. That's probably what this thing would be best for, and it appears that's what it was, in fact, built for. Like I said, this is based off of that. It's not exactly the same, but it takes a lot of design choices that are very, very similar to the DB Class V90, which is really cool. It's nice to see some like, German stuff in this as well. Some of the German stuff is kind of cool, actually. But before it gets too much lighter, let's go ahead and hop on board. You can just hop up there, by the way. If you come up next to the ladder and jump, you can just hop on in. So, first things first, startup sequence. So let's get that going. First of all, you've got your breaker box back here. You got 2 switches. You got to turn both of those on. One of them is your starter. The other one is your electrics. Once you have those on, you come over here to your starter button. You press and hold that until it starts up. Alright, and then once it's on, it's started up and everything, as you can see. And, before I get moving and everything, again, while there's still a little bit of darkness left and you'll be able to see the lights, let's go ahead and turn on, let's go ahead and go over some of our lights. So, first of all, you have lights front and lights rear. You have the cab light, the wipers, and the sander in this panel here. So, obviously, lights F, that's lights front, lights R, that's lights reverse. Turning them backwards will turn on the lights. So, it's long hood forward on this one, so the longer hood is the front. So, keep that in mind. As you can see, you've got those end lights there. You turn it again, and it'll turn them on brighter, and then going back the other way, turning this dial to the right, you get the running lights there again, and you get your low beams. Kind of see it. Kind of see it there. And then, oops, other way. All the way, of course, you get your high beams. It's a bit foggy. It's a bit difficult to see what's going on, but you can kind of see it in the fog. And then, of course, same thing with the rear lights. And same thing with the rear lights in reverse. From there, you have your cab light. Now, your cab light actually has two positions. The first position turns on only... It's a little hard to see because it's kind of in the sun right now. But it turns on only the lights for the... for your dash gauges. And then the second position turns on the cab light, which is located right there. Which I'll leave on for the sake of the video for right now. And then, lastly, as it is in fact raining, let's go ahead and get those wipers on. There's a couple positions, of course. As per the usual, you got slow, medium, and just full on. I'm just going to leave them going on medium. So that's that. From there, of course, quick other things to mention about your kind of electronics and everything. You, of course, have your bell. So, let me just let you hear this. Yeah, we're gonna turn that off. That is a weird, like, almost like car alarm kind of a bell warning device. It's really weird. But alright, it's a different flavor of bell. I'm used to like a ding ding bell, but that's like a whamp, whamp. And it's great. It's so great. And then, of course, you have, this is down here, your button for your horn. A little odd placement, but that's your button for your horn. It sounds a little bit like the horn from the DE2 a little bit, but like slightly tweaked, if I'm being honest. Like, it sounds like that with some other weird tones or whatever. Very similar, though. Like, they could be made by the same, like, horn manufacturer or whatever. Or something. Getting into the actual controls of things, you have a bunch of different gauges. You have your brake pipe. You'll notice this button is flashing. That's simply because the handbrake is on, like in the DE3, or excuse me, not DE, DM3, like I mentioned before. The handbrake, if the handbrake is on, then the brake pipe warning light will be turned on and blinking. So just that's something to be aware of. And all you gotta do to fix it, you turn your brake off. So with this one, you have, of course, your sand gauge, your fuel gauge, your oil gauge. You have your oil temp gauge and your tachometer. And of course your speedometer. So the tachometer in this one, let me make sure that I get this right. Okay, so the white needle is for the engine itself, the diesel engine, and the red needle is for the drivetrain. So you'll notice that we have some RPMs on the white one, because that's the engine itself, that's the motor. It's generating, and so because it's on, it's generating some RPMs, but we're not moving. So the red needle is at 0, because we're not moving, because that's our wheels. As we get going forward, that is going to, of course, change, and we'll have to be paying attention to that. As that changes, our oil temp is also going to come up, and you'll see this blue light here, which it will turn on, and that's the indicator that the fan has turned on. Once the oil temp gets to the yellow, it will automatically turn that fan on, bringing it back down. You can overheat it if you keep throttling it up past that point, but it's honestly not that easy. That fan keeps it well regulated most of the time, unless you're like full throttling uphill with absolutely no, you know, like you're at full tonnage, got a big, huge train behind you, that kind of thing, then you're mostly going to be fine. And then obviously, one last thing is this is the sander. You got 2 different positions on that, so keep that in mind. But yeah, so the way that this works, let's see, the difference between these 2 needles is the farther apart they are, the more torque we're going to be generating. The closer together, the less torque we're going to be generating. But the farther apart that they are, I believe the more our oil temperature is going to come up. I believe that's how it works, at least according to the wiki. Like I said, I don't really know how diesel hydraulics actually work. I have a vague idea, but I'm going to be honest, guys. I'm not an expert on this type of locomotive, but I do know how the one in the game mostly behaves, and so I can mostly explain it to you guys. So then, of course, you've got your reverser and throttle. Really self-explanatory. You've got your train brake and your independent brake. If you've watched my other tutorials, you should know by now the independent brake controls the brakes for just the locomotive, and the train brake controls it for the whole train. The difference with this train brake is the more you apply the brake, you can see the pipe up over here, the more brake you apply, the more it's going to keep it there, but you do not need to set it back into any kind of running position. It's a self-lapped brake, and so wherever you put this handle is how much brake is going to be applied, and you just leave it there. Whenever you're done with the brakes, you can release. And so that makes it quite a lot easier. The only other thing that exists in here is the dynamic brake, which is a bit difficult to demonstrate unless we're moving, so I might get an opportunity to kind of show you guys, but we're going to mostly be going uphill for this job. We're going to be picking up a job from the oil well central to the machine factory in town, which is pretty much all uphill. There's a little tiny bit of downhill, but not a lot. So, and it will use the engine RPM, it'll use the engine to change the gearing, basically, gearing quote-unquote, the different torque converter that allows it to be, to slow everything down and everything. So the only other 2 things that are in here are kind of pointless. They're just cool that they modeled it. You have here a cab heater, which there is a button for, though it doesn't look like you can actually use the button, which is kind of strange. And you also have a cab fan, which you can use the button for, and you just kind of... I'm assuming that there's a sound there. I can't quite tell. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But yeah, it doesn't really do much of anything. It's just aesthetic. And speaking of the aesthetic, I really love the way that now that it's daylight, like, let's take a quick look at this thing. So it's based off of that one engine. It is a really kind of cool looking engine. It's got some cool characteristics. Nice, reasonably high visibility in there. It is MU compatible. We were talking about that with the DM3, that it was not MU compatible. This locomotive is MU compatible. Not only that, the DM3, something I forgot to mention about it, was that you can't use the remote control with the DM3, because it is, again, same reason for why you can't use the MU hose, but you can use the remote control with this locomotive, and you can also, like I said, use the MU hose with this locomotive, which is really, really neat. And then again, of course, taking a look on the inside, you've got things like your cab fan and cab heater, which don't actually do anything, but provide nice aesthetic and immersion, which is really cool. You, of course, have your windows that open. And I like this cab. The DM3 is super duper beat up and rusted out, and you really want to make sure you have your tetanus shots before you go into that thing. But this one looks a lot nicer. It looks a lot cleaner and a lot better used. It looks like the rain's stopping. Let's go ahead and turn our wipers off. But it looks a lot nicer. It looks like it's been a bit better maintained. It looks older, you know, a little bit beaten, but not, like, abused like the DM3. I love that design choice where, you know, the diesel mechanical, you know, it's a shunter, gets beat the crap out of, and treated relatively poorly, and it's all kinds of rusty and everything. But this one's in relatively reasonable condition, and it's really, really cool. I love that about these. The designers did a really excellent job with the texturing, and, you know, there's like dirt and a little bit of rust and a little bit of whatever, but it's not, it just feels used, and I love that about this. The last thing I'll go ahead and mention before we get this thing moving, and we're going to take that job right there, I believe, is a couple of stats about this locomotive. So the license for this engine is 50 grand, and it has a mass of 80 tons, a length of 13 meters, and it has a load rating of 800 tons. So this thing should be able to pull trains of 800 tons in weight. And that's a rough estimate. Again, I feel like it could do just a hair more, but you're also going to run a real high risk of overheating it, but it should be able to handle 800 pretty easily. I mean, it'll be loaded down, but it should be able to do it. So we're going to come grab that train right there, and in doing so, I will show you guys how to actually move this locomotive. So, obviously, reverser, forward, reverse, neutral. Let's go ahead and throw it into forward, because we need to get on the other track. And make sure that our brakes are all released and our handbrake is off. It is. And we're going to go ahead and pull back on our throttle. The only thing about this thing is, it's pretty noisy. It is pretty noisy, but, this is probably one of the easiest engines to run, in my opinion. It kind of just does so much on its own. So you'll see, as we get going, well, we brought up the engine RPM and the wheel RPM. And we are now rolling. And so you can see how that's kind of getting affected there. And at an idle, you'll see it idles around 600 RPM. And of course, again, the wheel RPM is going to basically be based on how fast you're going. Alright, so let's go ahead and back up and grab our train. And I'll kind of be able to explain better about the dynamic brake once we get moving. You can see how the torque's coming up because our RPMs are coming up, our wheels, you know. So whenever those two needles are very far apart, you're going to be generating more torque, but more oil temperature. So you'll see that's begun to slowly come up as we are accelerating. Also, we're handling hazmat today. I believe we're going to be picking up some methane, and so we've got to be kind of a bit more aware of that fact. Let's go ahead and get slowed down to around about a nice, like, 5 would be great. Alright, let's go ahead and grab this up and take it onward. Alright, we'll go ahead and grab our job. That's not the job thing. This is the job thing. Alright, so let's go ahead and hop on board. I got my job. And let's get moving. Get our doors closed. Alright, and so, like I said, we're just going to go ahead. Our brakes are not all off. Alright, now the brakes are all off, and let's get moving. Alright, so that is basically how she goes. The one thing I didn't mention, by the way, is the fuel cutoff. So whenever you go to shut it off, this is the button that's going to turn it off. All the diesels have like a fuel cutoff of some kind, and that's the only thing I forgot to mention on this thing. But yeah, we're really moving now. We got our hazmat. Let's make sure we handle this train well. We'll clear up to 7. Let's go ahead and get moving. Alright, so as you can see, our oil temperature is coming up. As we're starting to accelerate, we got a 6 up ahead. And actually, we've got a reasonable amount of going on, so we probably want to be going closer to 30 through this next bit. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and slow us down using the dynamic brake here. So I'm going to go ahead and apply some dynamic brake. You'll hear it kick on. And the more that you turn this on, you'll start to slow down a little bit without using any of your brake pressure or anything like that. You're just using the engine. Yeah, we want to be going 3. You're using the engine to change the way that the hydraulic fluid is moving, which slows the train down. The dynamic brake does generate oil temperature heat, though, and so you've got to be careful of that going downhill. If your oil temperature is getting too hot, even with a dynamic brake, then you can honestly switch to the train brakes. But in all honesty, whenever I'm driving this thing, I am pretty much going to use the dynamic brake almost all the time for my braking until I'm coming to a stop. Because if I don't need to be going all the way to a stop, then it really isn't too necessary, in my opinion, to use these if I have the dynamic brake. Also, in order to use the dynamic brake, you do have to be, your throttle does have to be off. And, again, this route, unfortunately, does not really take us on much of a downhill, and so that's about the best example of the dynamic brake that I can really use, but I will be able to show a lot more about the uphill and the oil temp coming up and everything as we get going uphill. Alright, so we should be good to go pretty fast at this point, so we're just going to keep going up. So as you can see, our oil temperature is coming up, and as it gets to that 90, it is going to, that's 90, right? Yeah. As it gets to that 90 there, oh, there it goes. I guess it gets a little bit almost to 90. You'll see the blue light came on, and you'll hear a noise. That's the fan, so that's trying to keep the oil temperature cool. As we're continuing to go. We are still accelerating, so we should be good to go. I don't think I need to put any more throttle in. What are we good up to? Oh, we're good up to 100 right here, so we're good to go. But the one thing you'll want to watch out for, once that fan turns on and stays on, if you keep climbing, because you can, if you throttle all the way up, like this, put it all the way in, your fan is not going to be able to, you'll notice the fan is now coming on, and it is, the oil temperature is still climbing, so you've got to be really careful about that. You don't want to overdo your oil temperature, so let's bring it way back down, because we do not need near that much power right now. This isn't that heavy of a train. So yeah, like I said, that fan is going to keep everything in check, more or less. It's going to kind of take care of itself with this one. It is, like I said, a bit more expensive, but for what it is, you're getting ease of use, you know? You're getting easy use with this thing. This thing is, I would argue that it's not necessarily the most powerful in the game, but it's one of the easiest to drive. You know, you can kind of get in it and not think too hard about it, as long as you know that you're going to have enough power to get up the hill. Which, speaking of, we are getting pretty close here to getting to the top of the hill. I'm gonna go ahead and slow down a little bit as we get to the top of the hill. Hello, lightning. And then we can kind of coast in. And I'd be lying if I said I knew how to brake this engine, other than running it off the rails. So I guess I have a plan for how we're going to end this episode. I usually end it with disaster, just for the sake of it's funny. Okay. And in we go. Just gonna slow us down a little bit with the dynamics. Just to once again demonstrate the dynamic brakes. Just kind of get us going a bit closer to 30. Although apparently we can do 50. Alright, slide us on in there. Now we just gotta make sure that we are in the line. I think we are. Go ahead and dump our air. Dump all of our air because we're running out of space. There we go. All right, and then like I mentioned as a quick point of note, just for the sake of it, we'll go ahead and turn off our engine here with the fuel cut off so you can see that. And come on back here, turn our brake on, and completed in 14 minutes. We got some good cash from that. Again, though, I don't really care. This is just a sandbox mode so that I can show you guys the engine and everything. I showed you guys the manual servicing with the steam engine, but again, manual servicing with the diesel engine is you just stick it there and kind of work the levers or whatever. There's nothing really to it at all. And yeah, like I said, so we're gonna do one last thing with this thing. I don't know how to brake this. If I'm being honest. I'm honestly not sure how to brake this locomotive. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna send it down the other side of this mountain. But yeah, for this locomotive, like I said, it's only 50K, right? It's only 50,000, and again, you're getting one of the easiest locomotives to drive with this license. And again, it's got MU compatibility, it's got radio control compatibility, so you can use the remote control and everything. This is definitely one of the, like, I would consider it to be one of the easier locomotives to run, because you can really just get in it and not think about it. It's really, really cool. And I love the design. It's a really cool engine. Like I said, manual servicing this thing is super duper easy, just like with all the diesels, so we're not going to cover that. But yeah, you can overheat the thing, like I showed. I started to show, but I wanted to finish the job. You can overheat the thing if you got it loaded down and you're at full throttle. You can still overheat the oil temperature, and that'll probably cause bad things to happen. But I also haven't derailed any of these in these tutorials, and so that's what we're going to be doing now. We're just going to let this thing coast. And yeah, like I said, it's a really cool engine, and it's an interesting engine because it's something that I have no idea how it works. I have a pretty good idea of how a diesel electric works, at least on a basic level, and a diesel mechanical as well. I don't know how the gears really, like, the gear shift patterns are hard for me to figure out, but most of the rest of it I'm able to mostly figure out, right? Kind of have a basic understanding of how it works, like the principles of how it works and everything. I have no idea how a diesel hydraulic locomotive actually works at all. And so I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even know that they existed until they put this in the game, and I'm super excited about that. Because now I'm probably gonna go figure out a little bit more about how this thing works, but for the sake of the tutorial, you know, I have a vague idea, I think, of how it works. If you know a bit more, feel free to post it in the comments. I'm largely going off of the wiki. For this particular one because, oof. I really don't understand how these work because I've never heard of one of these until this one. But it's a really cool example of something neat, something different, and I really like it. But with that, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. We're going to be doing more of these tutorials. Oh, there we go. We're going to be doing more of these tutorials. Obviously, next up, we're going to be doing the S282 for the next one, which is going to be super great. And then I'm really, really hopeful that they'll put the DE6 slug in. So we might have to wait a little bit before I do the DE6, because I'm waiting for the DE6 slug to happen, and then I can do a video on both of them at the same time. But yeah, the next one, like I said, the S282 is going to be next for next week. I hope you guys are excited for that one. I hope you guys find this tutorial interesting, helpful, and entertaining. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Later, everybody.